Croeso and welcome to Cardiff Referee Society's meeting with English Premier League and FIFA assistant referee Neil Davis. Neil has kindly given up his time to talk to our members about matchday preparation for elite referees.
And thank you for the invite as well. I actually really enjoy coming to do these events, and I will share some slides just to help sort of go through what I was planning to talk through today. So just give me 1 second to do that, and I'll just double check. Is that now sharing and displaying? Excellent. So yeah, to an extent, the idea of doing this on Zoom was really helpful because although I'm not away at the moment, I am flying out to Albania on Monday, which will be good fun to do an under-21s game. So yeah, no, thank you for accommodating that because you never know with the international breaks. It's a break for everyone else, but not for us. So you can be scrambled into anywhere at any time. But yeah, in terms of what I was going to cover today, I wanted, well, Kim suggested, I don't know where the suggestion come from, that I talk through a little bit around match preparation, and I've titled it Elite Match Preparation, but hopefully some of what I talk about this evening will be stuff that's relevant for you guys as well. And we can perhaps have a discussion about ways in which some of the things that I'm sort of blessed with being able to do because of this facilities that we have, you might be able to do the equivalent, but at a different level to fit what you're able to do. So in terms of what I'll cover, I'll do a little bit of introduction just to share a bit of background of who I am and where I've come from. We've already touched on a little bit of my experience in the introductory comments before some of you arrived, as I know some of the faces on the call already, but I'll mention that as I go through. But what I was going to talk about really is the way in which now we, operating on the Premier League, are preparing for games to try and enhance the way in which we perform in as much as possible, recognizing that the clubs don't stay still at all. They are always developing, and therefore we need to develop with them to cope with what they're doing. And as I alluded to before, I'm happy to take questions at the end to the extent that you want to fire any at me. The worst I can do is tell you I won't answer them, but in pretty much all cases I will try and answer, guessing what some of the topics might be this evening. So I guess just as a bit of an introduction to me and who I am, I've been refereeing now for over 20 years. So I started officiating in the year 2000, based actually in the northwest of England, on the Wirral. And I think when I last met some of you guys, that's probably where I was flying out of when I did things like the USA Cup and the Norway Cup, which is where I've met Kim and Mike and Darren and others previously. But I spent time as I was developing refereeing in Oxford as well, while I was at university, and I now am based in central London, one of the few actually Premier League officials based down there, because of geography and the way that things work in England. It tends to be that all of the officials are based in the north actually, but yeah, I'm there by myself now with a couple of others relatively close. I refereed on the Contributory League, so for us that's the Northern Premier League, Southern League, until about 2016, and that was the point at which the system in England changed, so that we were focusing solely as either assistants or referees. And for me, that was quite a tough decision. I would have loved to have been good enough to carry on refereeing and to get to a top level as a referee, but I sort of had the realization that I probably wasn't. I'd spent 9 years at the same level, and maybe I could have got a couple more higher, but probably wasn't going to get to the very top. And so I took the opportunity to go as an assistant. Spent a couple of years on the newly formed Select Group 2, as it was at that time, and well, still is actually operating on the Championship as an assistant, and then was I guess lucky. I'd worked hard on that first couple of years to do well, and got my first taste of Premier League action on the 1st of January 2018, doing what for me felt like a massive game. What on paper looks like an awful game between Leicester and Huddersfield, but for me it was great. I was working with Graham Scott and Con Hatzidakis, and delivered what was a very tame 3-0 win for Leicester, but actually really exciting from my perspective. And that was my first opportunity, and then eventually got permanently onto the list in that summer. Since then, I've operated as a FIFA assistant since 2021, and that's been an opportunity to go to some really nice places, some really strange places, and as I alluded to before, actually getting to do things at last minute. So one of my most interesting experiences as a FIFA assistant was getting a call one afternoon to say, how quickly can you get to the airport? Because I was required to fly out to Latvia that afternoon to do an assistant VAR appointment, I think it was, at the drop of a hat, and that's not not normal, but it's still part of the excitement that comes with that role. And most of those places that I go to now, Latvia, probably one of them, you would never ever go on holiday, but it's nice to go and tick off and see those places and work with new officials as well. And then I suspect this is probably what provoked Kim asking me this question, because I caught up with Kim last year when I was down in Cardiff for something, I presume a game, actually, now I think about it. And at that time, I think I'd sort of been given the nod that I might be doing the FA Cup final last June. Fortunately, that was more than a nod, and it got confirmed, and I was delighted to be able to officiate in the the one and only Manchester derby that's been an FA Cup final, a game that went very well for myself, Paul, and Scott, who you can just about see in the picture there to the left. Scott's head is cut off, actually doing Luton West Ham on the opening game of Luton's home season, or home game of this season. But yeah, we had a really nice day. I can answer some questions about that later if you wish. But from our perspective, the main thing was it was uncontroversial, and that's, I think, the most you can ask for from a big cup final like that. So that's a little bit about me. As I say, I'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So unless anyone's got anything burning that they want to quiz me on now, I'll move on to the sort of more training element of what I was going to cover. Perfect. Okay. So as I say, I'm going to spend most of the time this evening talking about match preparation and give you a sense of what we do on the Premier League and why we do it. I'll give you hopefully an insight into some things that you will never have seen before in relation to refereeing, little snippets, screenshots, and so on of things that we get access to. I can also potentially show you some of the footage that we have access to, but it'll depend a little bit on how well my computer is working this evening as to whether I can do that. But what I was going to talk about is probably 6 different areas of what we talk about as holistic performance. Holistic's one of those words I hate using because it's just mumbo jumbo, really. But basically, it's all the different things that go into making a top refereeing, and in my case, assistant refereeing performance. So from simple things like the logistics of how we organize our life, which might sound relatively easy. You just get one game a week, you have to go and do it, and that's fine. It's not as simple as that. Our life is not quite as jolly as that might seem. To probably the most sophisticated element of this performance, which is what I've termed as contextual decision making. And I'll come and talk about that a bit more later, but it's the idea that you've got the laws of the game and they're very well defined in many respects, but actually operating on what effectively is a product, the Premier League, it's an entertainment product. How do you make decisions that facilitate the quality products that the Premier League want to offer, and some of the things that we have to take into account in order to help that product to thrive in the way that it does. So I'll come and talk about that in a bit more later. So what I was going to do is maybe talk a little bit and try and put this in the context of what happens on a week by week basis for us, how the appointments get released, how we then prepare for games in the different aspects that I've talked about in the brief introduction. And really everything we do starts at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, which horrendously late for the following weekend in many respects, but it's done for our protection in the sense that what we don't want is the public knowing where we're going, having opportunity to I guess attempt to seduce us into certain things, and really it is just to make sure that we're not susceptible to temptation from certain things that might be flying around within the world of sport, and particularly in relation to gambling, for example. But what that means is that as soon as 10 o'clock lands on a Tuesday, generally speaking, you'll check your email inbox, you'll find out where you're going, and you'll work out whether you've got, in my case, whether you've got to get around the corner to Crystal Palace or whether you've got to trek all the way up to Newcastle, and that then leads to a degree of logistical planning. In my case, I rely on the train because of where I live in London, central London. There is no point me having a car because it would add about 2 hours onto every journey if I was going somewhere. So in my case, I try and work out which train I can get, how early I want to get there, make sure I've got plenty of time to get to places in advance. So we will typically stay over before every Premier League game, even if it's pretty much on our doorstep, just to give us that chance to make sure we're relaxed, we're well prepared, we're not rushing around on the morning to try and do things. And I appreciate that's probably one of those things where you think, well, yeah, that's great. That's not really something I can do. I can't go and stay in a hotel every game. But it's the difference between arriving, an hour before kickoff and arriving 2 hours before kickoff is the type of preparation I would think about from your perspective. Is what do you need to do to make sure you got the best chance to be well prepared for games? The other thing I mentioned there, just because it was on my mind when I wrote this, because I think I was in the middle of planning my week during the train strikes a couple of weeks ago. They have been a nightmare for me, but nonetheless, we get around those in various ways. I've had a couple of occasions where I've had to plead for double nights in hotels to make sure I can travel 2 days before to get there because I know the trains aren't running on the day of the game. But that's not very enjoyable when you're just sitting in a hotel for a day before a game doing nothing. But nonetheless, it's better than not being there at all. So that I guess is the sort of really dull bit of what we do. But that genuinely is the administrative aspect. I think the more interesting is the fine tuning aspects of what we do. So I'll have a game on. Next Saturday, say a week on Saturday, sorry, after the international break. I know, for example, I'm away Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week in Albania for a game, and yeah, uh, that adds a logistical challenge because I know that I will land back in the UK on Wednesday. I will then have to work out what training I then need to do and what recuperation I need to do to get myself prepared for whatever game I'm doing at the weekend. So that international schedule adds complication to the diary. The meeting schedule that we have, so we meet on a 2 weekly basis, typically during the season, to do training up at Loughborough University or at St George's Park, so the equivalent of the National Football Centre in Wales down near Cardiff, and that all then sort of builds into what we do from a physical training perspective, which I'll show you some details of in a second. But my general approach is to work back from a game, so I'll know that I've got a game on this day, so the things I need to do physically to get myself ready for that, whilst also recovering from the previous game, are set in certain ways so that I can arrange that. So that leads nicely on to that, looking at that in more detail. So we're really lucky. We have a lot of support from a physical perspective in terms of our training. So what I've shown here on the right is my training plan for this week. Apologies, it's a bit small, but I can sort of read through and highlight some of the key details of this to help talk you through it. So I think there's a couple of aspects. One is that this is a week with a game. So you'll notice the days of the week are shifted. So it starts on the Friday with the game on Saturday. So I did Luton versus Tottenham on Saturday last week. So immediately prior to a game, the key thing for me is to make sure that I'm doing some what I would describe as activation work. So some short, sharp speed work on the day before the game to get the body ready for the next day, but then also a significant amount of rest in relation to that, so that when you are going out to do that game on a Saturday, in this case 12:30 kickoff at lunchtime, you're ready and raring to go. And that then immediately following that is also the aspect of recovery. So generally speaking, the day after a game is fairly light, as you would expect, although it's not a complete go out and sit in the pub all day type day. It's some active recovery. So in our case, that will be something at home, using the bike, just turning the legs, getting them refreshed a little bit, doing some foam rolling, doing some stretching, stuff that helps the body to get ready for what's coming next. And then, because we haven't got a game in the diary at the moment, beyond this schedule, we work on a week by week basis. So I'll have another schedule. I haven't actually looked at it yet to tell me what I'm doing from tomorrow onwards. But because we're on a break in theory, this week has been quite a mixture of quite a lot of rest. So that's why you can see that full rest day in there on Wednesday, but then some really quite intense sessions that we wouldn't normally get to fit in during a week because we don't have that recuperation time. So speed endurance is long extended sprints with quite a bit of rest, but you're still a little bit tired before you then go and do another sprint again, and you repeat that. It's maybe a half-hour session, but it's quite a hard working session, and that's the type of thing that we can do during an international break because the body has more chance to get ready for the next lot of games that we have. So that's the how the weeks look. The other things I was going to mention that are just those that are highlighted on the left hand side there are some of the support aspects we get. So because we are effectively remote workers, one of the challenges we have relative to a football club is that football club players can meet on a daily basis. They get told what to do. They get put through their paces in whichever session. But we are all remote, and so we only get together, if we're lucky, once every 2 weeks. And what that means for us is that they've now started setting up a network of regional bases that we can go and attend to do specific training sessions. So in my case, I use a university close to where I live, and I go in there once a week at least and use one of their personal trainers effectively to work through some specific strength and conditioning work, that being the thing that you can least easily do at home because there's a lot of technique associated with it, because what they don't want us doing is popping to the gym, doing a session that we think is relevant, but actually finding that we're doing more harm to ourselves by doing a squat with a very poor technique and that sort of thing. So that work has been really helpful from my perspective. It aids the longevity of your career, if nothing else, but also helps with injury prevention and that sort of thing, because you're then stronger and ready to go for the game. And a lot of the work that we do in those sessions, in my case, will be about the atypical movements that an assistant referee does. So a lot of power-based stuff around moving side to side to help ensure that we're ready for what we need to do. And then the other aspect of that is the recovery therapy that I've mentioned there. So we have access to therapists who are available to, in some cases, just give us a massage, or if we've got a bit of a niggle, to help us to treat that and to develop some recovery mechanisms to help us to get ready for the next games if we have got a little bit of a niggle as well. Look a little bit. So the one aspect of this chart that I've not talked about yet is the row at the top, which you might have noticed, which is the nutrition theme. So again, something that we've been working on, particularly over the last couple of years, is the fact that previously we'd always been left to our pretty much own devices to work out what we should be eating, what we should be taking in around matches and just generally during the week. And in a lot of cases, people could sort of muddle through. They had a pretty good idea of what they should be and shouldn't be eating. So it's pretty obvious you shouldn't be having a burger and chips on the morning of a game. But maybe it wasn't obvious that you shouldn't have, I don't know, a big pasta meal on the morning of a game or something like that, because actually that may not be it may be a good thing to have the day before a game, but is it the right thing to have on the morning of a game before you then go and do a match in the afternoon or the evening? So what we've been helped to do in the last couple of years is to think about both what we eat, and I'll show some examples of that on the next page, and also when we eat it in terms of what we describe as the periodicity of our training. So when the training load goes up and the match load goes up, we should be consuming more and certain types of food. And then as we're on our rest days, then we should be consuming less to match that, so that you're not eating the same all the time and finding that you're really tired on the days when you're training hard, and basically overeating on the days when you're resting. So that being the case, so that those references to red, yellow, and green are roughly speaking aligned with what I've shown on this slide here. So if you remember from the previous slide, the red was the stuff around game days and the day before the game. So where you're really just loading up for what you've got to do. So a lot of carbohydrates, and to an extent, these are the easy days because you can eat quite a lot of what you want in terms of. Oh, hold on, let me just get rid of this notice. Um, yeah, you can eat big pasta meal the day before a game, but lots of fruit and veg as well to get the right sort of vitamins and minerals, and a moderate amount of fat and protein because you want some aspect of that in your diet, but not too much of it around games. The green days are the rest days, so they are very light in terms of what we're suggesting. So they're things like salads at lunchtime, relatively light salads in the evening, but a reasonable degree of protein. So you might have something like a big, chicken with some vegetables and stuff in the evening, but not too much in the way of fat. And then yellow is somewhere in between that. So you're trying to get a high level of vegetables, fruit, and protein, and then moderate levels of fat and carbohydrates. And I think the one thing that really made a difference for me with this is noting how much protein you needed to be taking in when you're training heavily. So that's the stuff that helps your muscles to repair and to grow themselves. And if you're doing a lot of training and putting strain on your body, that's the thing that you need to be taking in. And I should say, I'm not trying to be a nutrition expert here, and I wouldn't take anything necessarily that I say as being stuff you should try and do, but I just wanted to give an insight of the types of things that we think about. And then again, transferring to how you might do this, if you do your own research, you might find, why was it I was feeling particularly tired on this day after I've done a game? Well, maybe it's linked to some of the things I was eating, and you could perhaps do some work around that. And just to give you an illustration, again, this is really probably quite hard to read because the version that we get is also pretty rubbish, but the examples I've shown there on the right hand side are just some illustrative menus that we're provided with. Not to say you must follow this, but just to give you an idea of the things that you might want to eat that will give you the right things on a red day. So the red shading there reflects that these are red day ideas. So I think that the things that you can see there that probably are helpful relative to what you might do if you weren't really thinking about it. So if you want a snack, it's not a bar of chocolate, it's a sort of nut-based, fruit-based bar, which, chocolate's nicer, but actually when you think about it, it's probably better for you not to have too much of that. And then it's things like the pre-bedtime snack here, which, you might have a couple of biscuits and a cup of tea, whereas what we're suggested to have is something pretty high protein in Greek yogurt and then some fruit and stuff to go with it. Very nice, but it's not a bar of chocolate, which is, and it's about breaking those habits and making sure that we're operating in line with the athletes that we're officiating for as well, because we know that they're doing the same sort of things as us. So that's all I was going to say on nutrition.
I was going to ask you, do you ever have an off day or
what, in terms of the nutrition side or the training, or both?
nutrition side?
So I think you have to, otherwise you just get like you the thing is, with a lot of this stuff, you can get too into it and almost allow it to ruin your life, because you can there's bad habits through eating the wrong things, but there's also bad habits through not allowing yourself a treat. And you'll see the next slide was about to be on psychology. One of the things that we spend a lot of time working out is how do you survive mentally in the pressured environment that we operate in. And some of that includes not becoming fixated about some of the things we have to do. So you have to allow yourself some time off, and that includes going out for a burger, chips, pizza, whatever, when it fits around training. So probably not doing it the day before you got your fitness test, but you might do it in the middle of the week when you've not got a game for 3 days. And that's you just make sure you do it at the right times and not too frequently. But that's probably a general rule for life, isn't it? So as I touched, I was going to then move on to psychological aspects, and I think this is quite a timely topic given what's been going on within our world for the last couple of weeks. It's probably fair to say that all the stuff that happened around the Tottenham Liverpool game has meant there's been a lot of pressure on us as a group from the press in particular. That pressure does exert itself. You do feel it. So, for example, I was on the pitch on the only game on the Sunday after the Liverpool Tottenham game, and that's probably been the most pressured game I've felt in terms of Premier League football. Not because the game itself was particularly difficult and challenging. There were a couple of decisions that sort of fell my way, but I think because we were aware of that scrutiny that was upon us on that day more than any, that's when it really is quite can be quite challenging to make sure that you're in a good psychological place to make decisions in a pressurized environment, and you know the world is watching, but also to look after yourself from a mental health perspective as well. So I think, from my point of view, there's some things that you just do as a matter of course. So regardless of the game, however big or little the profile of it is, whether it's a Premier League game or an EFL Cup game or whatever, being rested, being relaxed is really important. So I mentioned before, the benefit of us being able to stay over in a hotel the night before is that we can generally get a pretty good night's sleep. We don't have to worry about the tiring aspect of traveling hundreds of miles on the day of a game, and we can have dinner with our colleagues. We can have breakfast together, and you can go into the game relaxed and ready to do it. And I think that's really important. Some of my colleagues use various things, psychological techniques to help prepare for games as well. So I've mentioned a couple of things here, which you can do some reading up on. I'm sure I can talk a bit more about it as well. But this idea of visualization or self-talk, the theory behind that is effectively that if you are visualizing something, that's effectively a way of practicing it. So you don't have to be on a pitch making offside judgments to actually make judgment. You can sort of imagine that you're making them, and that it doesn't necessarily make you better at judging the offside decision, but by imagining yourself in that position and the pressure around you and the stimulus and distractions that you're going to have, you can be then better prepared when you're actually in that situation in real life. So they are some of the techniques that we work with our performance psychologists, which I've mentioned on the right there, and that's one of the big supports that we get. So in the same way now that you will hear professional athletes. So I think, from in my memory, the likes of Tiger Woods were some of the first to really make a virtue of using performance psychology coaches in their world, and that now pervades football as well. It's within all the clubs, and we now have access to that within refereeing too. And I think that's really helpful. Most of the time, they are doing work to enhance what we do. So trying to make sure that we are showing strong body language, because that then helps to promote good strong decision making as well, and all of these things that go into convincing the players around you that you are capable of doing making the decisions in a strong way. So I think that's the sort of positive performance aspects of the support that we have. But then we also recognize that sometimes people do struggle, and that's why we have the mental health support as well that comes into it. So that's more protecting people when they're struggling with things. So the events of the last couple of weeks, the support around the guys involved in that will have been really strong to make sure not only they're ready to go and perform again on the Premier League, but also they're generally well, and they're not suffering. Because when the media is talking about you all the time and reporting on the fact that you're not appointed to games or whatever, that's not an easy situation to be in, and so you need to have that support around you. And then the bottom one is probably more important than any of them, certainly from my perspective, in the sense that being able to go and talk to colleagues who understand the situation you're in and get their perspective on things, they can help you to put things into perspective sometimes, so that you are not getting overly worried about certain things that could be impacting your performance or impacting your life as well. So that's really it from a psychological perspective. The reason I put the clip of VAR on the bottom there was to remind me of two things. One is because I think it's relevant. It's one of the things that's been in the press recently around all the stuff with the recent instance, but also because this is a particular area of interest for me, is performance psychology. So I've actually recently done a degree course in performance psychology. I'm waiting for the grading to be done at the moment, but one of the things I had to do for that was a research project, and I did a study on the impact that psychology and personality can have on the way in which VARs make decisions in games. So looking at the way in which different types of people process information in that scenario. And I think some of the stuff that's happened recently is quite a good example of how the way in which people process information and think from a psychological perspective can have a real impact on the way they make decisions. So I think it's a fascinating area. Again, happy to talk a bit more about that later, but yeah, I think that's something that we can again come back to later. I've also just spotted that a few people have been putting questions in the chat, so I don't know whether okay, if I may, I'll answer those questions at the end. I think is it Mike who's put those in around. Yeah, I'll pick those up at the end. I was expecting those to come up. Okay, so that's on psychology. The next couple really is now getting down into the nitty-gritty details of games and what we do to combat the fact that clubs are very, very clever. They're always evolving and they're always doing things to improve the way in which they try and win games and how they try and get an edge over their opponents. And yeah, we need to work hard to keep pace with that, because we need to try and make sure that we referee the game of football that is in front of us, and we want to forearm ourselves with as much as we possibly can to aid our decision making. So before every game, we get sent by the PGMOL a pack of data, which is effectively a set of clips about the two clubs that we're officiating. And that will look from a refereeing perspective at things like the way in which they play the ball around the middle of the park, certain players that might be susceptible to doing certain things, so players that are fouled frequently, players that foul frequently, again, so that we can go into a game aware of where we might be focusing our attention. From an assistant perspective, there's a lot of information about offsides there, and I'll talk about that specifically in a second, around how that works. The other things that we do, I've mentioned match of the day there. It doesn't have to be match of the day. It's anything really. But the point I wanted to make here is that it is unacceptable for us to be doing a game on a Sunday unaware of what has happened on the Saturday within the Premier League. Because if you think about the way in which the likes of Match of the Day and Sky Sports look at football, they generally think about football as a weekend event. So something that happens on Friday will impact the public opinion of what happens on Sunday. We need to be aware that if a penalty has been given for a certain offence on a Friday or on a Saturday, then probably just for consistency, we need to make sure that we deem the same sort of incident in the same way on a Sunday. Now, that's not always the case, because a mistake may have been made on the Friday, but where there is some leeway and some grey areas in certain decisions. So, what is a penalty versus what isn't a penalty in terms of the amount of contact that is deemed a foul or not, we will have to try and moderate ourselves to be consistent across the weekend. And I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't think that's disingenuous in any way. I think it's just a fair reflection of the way in which the Premier League and the world around us expects us to officiate matches. And that's one of the joys of being involved, because it creates this challenge every weekend that you're trying to sort of safely deliver a load of football matches in a consistent manner. So that's one bit that we focus on. I think the other then that I've mentioned here is our coaching calls. So it might surprise you to hear that we no longer get assessed on a Premier League game. And you will be familiar. I think the system you use is the sort of 8.3, 8.4 system. Is that right? Within Wales. So we used to have that. We then migrated to a system whereby every decision was assessed on a decision by decision basis. So every throw in was looked at, every free kick was looked at, every penalty was looked at, and we'd get a tick or a cross against all of them. And they decided that actually, given the way in which they want us to officiate, they'd rather us take a more holistic approach to it and make sure, and therefore that should be matched by the way we're assessed. And effectively now we have a coach who is watching every game with us, and he will work with us after the game and in advance of game to talk through certain things that we've done well, think we might do for the next game, to make sure that we are developing as a set of officials. So from an assistant perspective, we have specific assistant referee coaches, so they will be more focused on some of the offside work that we need to do, but the refereeing coaches will work with us alongside the referees to make sure that we're offering the right level of teamwork. So for example, I can show you an incident. In fact, I can try and do this now. Give me 1 second, if I can share a different screen. Yeah, I'll see if I can do that later. But basically, I can show you an example maybe when I'm not pressured by trying to run the presentation, where something that would often be considered a refereeing decision, but actually where good teamwork can help you to get to the right outcome when the referee's not been well sized, not been able to see an incident. So I'll try and share that later on. The final point I made there, and I'll mention this several times this evening, I think, is the use of colleagues. So if you're officiating, in my case, Luton versus Tottenham last Saturday, who did Luton, who did Tottenham the previous week? What is it that they were doing during those games, and what is it that I can take into my game to help me with the way in which I perform? And we do that on a frequent basis, whether it's at meetings or whether it's just picking up the phone. And that's the thing, probably, that of all the things, because I appreciate that a lot of this is stuff that would never be anything that's accessible to anyone other than us, because we're very lucky with the things that we have. But I would say the bottom two there are two things that you can reasonably do. So to the extent that you have access to coaches or fellow members of the RA, people you can talk to help talk through different incidents, or colleagues who've done a team the week before might be able to give you a little bit of a snippet of information. When they're defending free kicks, they always push up to the edge of the area or something like that, or they always run out quickly and try and play a really high line. They're the types of things that might assist you if you're running a line, or in a refereeing case, they might be able to suggest certain players who might be more challenging than others in terms of how you officiate them. So it's worth having that conversation, particularly if you know the referees from the week before, to get that intel. And then just before I finish on this bit, I wanted to focus on a little bit around assistant refereeing, because that's the way I think about things. That's my job. And I think from an offside perspective, the things that we start to really look at in advance of a game now. So obviously the laws of the game is one. And the reason I put that in is because for us not to know the laws of the game is unacceptable. And so we regularly have tests on that. I was going to actually chuck a few test questions in tonight, but I didn't have time in the end. So you're saved me putting you under pressure and actually getting you to do some work. But yeah, they're the types of thing. Every meeting we really will have some element of testing of the laws, just to make sure that we know not just the easy bits, the bits that you use every day, but the bits that are more obscure and may not necessarily pop off the top of the head. But putting that bit aside, I think from a free kick perspective, from an offside perspective, I think there's certain things that we will look at when we're preparing for a game. So the ones that are really challenging for us are where players are. There's lots of players, and you need to try and work out what's going on. So, for example, on free kicks, I did Brentford against Nottingham Forest the other week, the day after the VAR incident at Liverpool, and Brentford tend to hold very high line. They use the end of the penalty area to hold as firmly as they can without dropping. So if you think about most free kicks, the defensive line drops. In Brentford's case, they try not to drop. Nottingham Forest tend to push and attack. So you get this situation where there's more offside incidents, but you're also very skeptical when you're an assistant referee in that situation, because you know that there's often lots of players behind the people that you can see. So going into that game, I'm trying to work out, what tactic do I use to give me the best opportunity to make a good decision on those incidents without relying on VAR, because that should be there as a safety blanket, not as the first call. And so by looking at some clips, I was able to then think, well, if I adopt a slightly different position on that game and I sort of drop slightly deeper, maybe I'll get an angle and be able to see a bit more. I'll be able to anticipate where players are moving a little bit. There's little things like that maybe where doing something non-standard can actually help you to enhance your decision making. Likewise on corners, do they always put people on the keeper? Do they group around the penalty spot and then move out in all directions, or do they try and create space by blocking people? All these things that have a little bit of a conundrum when we're operating as a team of 2 or 3 that can help us to get to the right outcome. And then again, these are the things that you won't necessarily have access to yourselves. But what I've shown here, a snippet, I've taken the players off because it probably wouldn't be fair for me to show you the individuals. But this is the offside data that I got, I think, last week for Luton. So these are the 5 players that have been caught offside for Luton so far this season. It shows the number of times they've been caught offside, and also by how much they were offside. There's another couple of bits of data that we were shown as well. But this all comes from a 3D mapping system that operates on all Premier League games. I think you might caught a glimpse of it before, but for every offside decision that I have to make in a game, I will get shown afterwards a 3D graphic like this that shows me exactly who was the second rearmost defender. So in this case, the blue player here is the second rearmost defender. This is the line of the defender, and the number 6 there is the attacker, who's in this case clearly in an offside position. But this can also operate to very fine margins, to within a centimetre. So I will get told whether my decisions were off by 1 meter or whether they were off by 1 centimeter, and whether I flagged or not. So fortunately in this case I did flag, I got this decision right. But sometimes there will be much finer margins when we have to make a call. And what's good about this software, I've only taken a screenshot of it here, but there's another view that can show me my position as well, so I can understand where I am relative to the decision. So I think this was a free kick instance, so I'm pretty sure I was probably in line with the white line here. But on an attack, when it's a quick break, I might be able to work out, well, actually I was 3 yards behind play because they moved very quickly, or even worse, I was ahead of play because I've almost prejudged it, and I'm then not making my angles as accurate as possible. So this is a tool we've only started using this year, but it's really helpful in trying to enhance what we do in terms of performance. So then, yeah, the final bit I was going to cover is this sort of concept of contextual decision making, and this is the idea I touched on at the very start, which is that there's the laws of the game, and they tell you what a free kick looks like. But in practice, particularly on the Premier League, but you will know this in the way that you referee, there are things when you will see a very slight contact in the penalty area, a little nudge in the back, and it's never a penalty. But technically, if you read the laws of the game, it says that a push is a penalty. And so, for us, this is about working out what, and you might have just caught it when I flicked onto the next screen. What's the right thing to do at the right time for the right reason? So this is thinking about the fact that let's use this weekend as an example, the Arsenal versus Manchester City games. Michael Oliver sees a challenge in that game, awards a yellow card for it, and it's probably one of those that if you had a room of people, probably about 75% would probably say it was a red card, and 25% would say it was yellow. But I think that's a good example of where the biggest game of the season so far, a decision that is probably acceptable in that context, doesn't put a team down to 10 men, which then creates a bigger controversy and leaves people a little bit sour that they've been deprived of the game that they wanted to see in some respects. Unless you were an ardent Arsenal fan, you probably think it'd be better to see 2 teams of 11 playing against each other. So navigating that situation, giving a decision that's not necessarily the purest right answer, but is a good acceptable decision in that situation, is an effective way to operate within the Premier League. And that's really what I mean by this. What I've shown here, and I just want to touch on a little bit about how we think about this and what we do in terms of training. So that contextual decision making is also this idea of being consistent across weeks and across weekends. So this footage here is some VAR output that we see on a week basis through a platform called 8x8. So we get sent maybe 10 clips each week of incidents from the previous weekend, showing the audio footage from those games. So you'll be familiar with that from some of the stuff that's been on TV recently, helping us to work out what the best decision would have been. So was the decision that was made on the day right, and was it wrong? and what was the VAR decision, and was that right or wrong to intervene as well, just to help us to get our heads straight as to what is the way to calibrate decisions. We also get on a weekly basis an update on the key match incidents. So that's what KMIs are. So were they right or wrong, and if they were wrong, what is it that we should have done better to get those right? And then the final point I was just going to make before I sort of wrap up is that this portal learning module point here, which is that on a probably monthly basis, we will get sent through the online portal that we use within the Premier League training sessions on various aspects. So the most recent one was on referee positioning. So I will confess I had a fairly cursory glance at that because it's not particularly relevant to me other than to understand where the referees are likely to be. But there will also be stuff on offsides, which clearly are very, very relevant for us from a training perspective. Looking at things like, what does impact mean? What does having a deliberate attempt to play the ball and this sort of thing. So these sorts of ways of sort of calibrating what we do from an offside perspective. So yeah, really just to wrap up, that last bit is all about, well, all of these things are all about trying to make sure that we adopt this philosophy at all times, which is doing the right thing for the right time at the right reason. And I appreciate that a lot of what I said tonight is stuff that I can do because I'm lucky position I'm in that we have access to all of this. But hopefully what I've also provided is a little bit of food for thought around things that you might be able to do in a more local level to enhance the way in which you perform, whether it's chatting to colleagues, whether it's doing your own research on things like nutrition, just to make sure that to the extent that you want to enhance your performance, ways in which you can do that. So that's all I was going to cover from a sort of...
Hope that you enjoyed watching the video. Please support the channel by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. More videos like this are on their way. Hoi o Vała!